Hello, my name is Greg Davis, and I'd like to welcome you to the CBS ArcSafe April 2024 webinar, talking a little bit about wastewater and water treatment plants and some different things that we're going to have for you today. We've got 6 devices we're going to show you. Some of the things I'll tell you from my first visit to a wastewater treatment plant here in Dallas, Texas, all the way back in 2010. One of the technicians I knew there, he says, we always have a problem with our control switches and all sorts of other stuff. And I talked to some of our other parts of Group CBS, and they said, Greg, you get a lot of sulfur reactions in a wastewater treatment facility where you're getting sulfur deposits that react with the silver or other things that are on the contacts in your switches, and that's the reason you have a breakdown in SCADA type gear there, and a lot of times you may have to go to the face of a breaker or something to actually open it, versus being able to do it from a control room, because you don't always have something that's going to be maintained in an air-conditioned room, which is going to be free of the sulfur vapors that you're dealing with around a plant like that. You know, you're dealing with a lot of humidity and other stuff, and this causes basically corrosion on your switch gear, and you do have to do maintenance for that. Now, the first product we're going to start with today is our RSA 10A. The original amp guard was a 1958 version before, made by Westinghouse, and we've seen very few of those. Those look like an old, if you're familiar with it, a Westinghouse 11300 series long size 5 motor starter. After that, from 1958 to 2004 is what we would call the classic Westinghouse amp guard. In 2004, after the acquisition by Eaton Cutler Hammer of Westinghouse, Eaton came up with this design, which we would call the current vintage of amp guard motor starters. Now, one of the things to note about this, there's also a current generation amp guard load break switch, which is not, it looks similar to this, okay, but it is a different item altogether. It's not one of the motor control centers. This, we use the RSO1 to operate. So we've got this in place. You'll notice we don't have to open the low voltage door on this to be able to use it. This is the RSO1 with the M18 Milwaukee batteries in it. And I'm just going to hold it up here so you guys can see it a little bit here. Okay, so we'll turn it on now. Okay, AR is off. And since we've got this in the open position, we're going to go close. You have to hold the RSA button down for the duration of the operation. And then for trip, we'll hold it down going the other way. I'll take it off here and you'll get to be able to see what the back side of this thing looks like here in just a second. This mounts with 2 of our twist-on magnets. So here's what the back side of the RSA looks like. These are the locators that go right around the handle right here for easy attachment. And there's the gap there for going right onto the handle. Always make sure the RSA is in the correct position. So if the handle is in the closed position, then make sure this is up in the closed position for putting it on there so it's going to be able to operate properly. Okay. The next thing we've got to show you is the RSK DS10, and this is for the close and trip of the DS breakers. Now, I'm going to take this off here and show you the back side of this thing and play with it for just a second. You're going to see this thing which says, do not attempt to install it on the breaker if this little actuator's out. And I'm going to actually put it out for a reason, just so you can see. Okay. So this makes sure that none of the actuators here on the back side are extended when you try and put this on the face of the breaker. All you have to do to reset it is push that back in with your finger like that, and now that everything's flush, we can mount it. Now, this is only going to close and trip the breaker. I still have to charge the spring manually, and I'm going to do that operation first here. Okay, now we can see we got a charged spring. And one of the things to remember about all this stuff is we can see that it's open. We can see we got a charged spring here. While I'm standing here today, you always want to be cognizant, whether I'm using this or anything else, that you're stepping outside of the arc flash hazard boundary. I can tell you one time we had our chief scientist, Finley Ledbetter, show up at a power plant, and a guy had not been trained in how to use a piece of equipment, and he was going to sit right in front of it as he watched it operate the breaker. And Finley just stood there for a second and said, let me help you with this, and then showed him how to properly use the equipment. Okay? You need to get training if you don't understand this, so that you operate outside of the arc flash hazard boundary, which is one of the primary objectives we have with this stuff. So even though I've only got a little 5 or 6 foot cord here, you know, a lot of times you may have a 50-foot arc flash hazard boundary. Know what your stickers are, know what they mean, so you get outside the arc flash hazard boundary, okay? So we now have our springs charged. We're ready to operate this. You have to hold down the enable button. And so I'm going to just twist this to the closed position now. And the breaker's now closed. And now it's for the trip position. It's tripped, okay? And that's how that's simple made to set up and operate, okay? This is our CHL1. This is the RSK CHL1 is for the Westinghouse 5-star Freedom Advantage 2100 series motor control center, size 1 through 4. And it can be in a single configuration handle like this, or in the dual handle configuration. Now, the only thing I'll tell you is if you're working with a dual handle one, you got to make sure that if somebody put a lockout tag out and you're working on the right side handle, that they remove the lockout on the left side handle for you to be able to install this thing on there so that it properly sits on there. The only problem we've ever seen anybody have is when they don't take, and I'm going to take this thing off here first and just explain this, okay? This edge right here is important because it's meant to go and butt up right against this vertical side here, okay? If you let this thing sag like this, then what's going to happen is the bottom one isn't going to have the range of operation to close the switch, okay? So that's one of the reasons you got to make sure when you're putting this on that it's all the way abutted up against this in a vertical fashion and not sitting like this or this on the switch. It needs to be flat with no gap in that inlet right there, okay? Now, this uses the M18 battery. You want to make sure that you have, when you're doing this stuff with the M18 batteries, okay, you're looking to have at least 3 bars on the battery for doing stuff. Can it operate with less? Yes, but we do not recommend that you do that and that you operate it with a fully charged battery. The batteries don't take that long to charge. I think it's about an hour. It's less than 60 minutes to fully charge the largest of the batteries. So take your time. Make sure you got them charged when you're getting ready to operate them. To operate this, we have our wireless version here, so we're going to go to wake. We hold down our enable button and we hold down on. And that's all it takes to operate this, okay? And then we go back to sleep, all right? Now, the motor control centers in wastewater treatment plants, sometimes you'll find like an old Westinghouse ABD ion breaker. It's the P frames we call them. And this is just a newer version, but this one's a square D version. This is the R frame. This is a flush mount versus a recessed mount. We've got different actuators in the ArcSafe 164 family for both versions of the breaker. If you have both versions of the breaker, you're going to need two ArcSafes to do the job, because we have to know the geometry for mounting to be able to make the correct actuator for the application. Okay, just so you understand that. This uses the ArcSafe or the RSO1, and anytime you're operating a device for open and close with the RSO1, you have to hold the button down just like with the motor control center for the duration of the operation. So I'm going to get over here and I'm going to hook the RSO1 up to here. Okay, it uses the 4-pin Amphenol connector on here. The switch is in the breaker's in the currently open position. I'm going to step behind the cart here so when I operate this thing you all can watch everything. So I'm going to lift it up here. I'm going to turn it on. AR is off. And I'm going to hold down close for the duration. So when we develop an actuator for something this big, you'll notice that that takes two linear actuators to operate, and that's just because of the sheer amount of force and the speed with which the breaker has to be able to be moving to get all three phases to close at one time. So we take into account, we do a lot of testing on this stuff to make sure that as we build something, it's going to work as desired for you, the operator in the plant. So I can tell you that, you know, I've always been impressed with the things that people have to face in something like a plant like a wastewater treatment plant. The first time I saw like a GE SE switch was in the wastewater plant in Dallas, and I had it explained to me how that switch operated and what you guys have to do. So my hat goes off to you. The next one we're going to use, you know, General Electric made the AK series of breakers starting back in the 1950s, and this is from an AK2 series breaker. We do have the RS2, which can install and remove this circuit breaker, and its bigger brother, the AK2, and operate it. Now, whenever for the General Electric series of circuit breakers, because the handle would be right here, okay, and you can't get to the trip button with the handle there for our actuators, you have to take that gray plastic handle off of there. And there's two Allen screws, set screws inside the handle you have to remove to get it off to be able to put the actuator on there. This actuator mounts with 6 little circular magnets right here, okay, that you can see right there. This cutout right here is got place for the little tabs that are on the face here for range of motion, which are the same as on the inside of the handle itself. And this is for the trip solenoid right here. So this simply lines up and it goes on to the handle extension coming out of the face and latches onto the face just like that. That's a single stroke, and we have our times of T1 and T2 that we use for the RSO 3D M18 version. It's like 2.8 and 2.8 with one stroke. So I'm going to turn this on now. Let me get those out of the way here. You can see everything here. So after it boots up, you see 2.8 for T1, 2.8 for T2 in one cycle. Now, all those T1s and T2s are how we set up our systems to be able to operate. So if you have any of our charged closed strip actuators, it'll say T1, T2 cycles. So like a Magnum DS will be like 5 cycles and it'll have the different time on it. Something for a Square D Master Pack, something else. For a electrical operated DS breaker, 9 strokes. For a manually operated one, 1. Okay, so all those things are all on the label that come with the piece of equipment. Okay, we have AR off. We're going to push charge close once. Now, the reason we have this button labeled charge close is this. Breakers like your first generation GEAK breakers, where you would move this handle up one time and bring it back down to the bottom, you're charging the spring and closing it all in one shot. So that's the reason that's labeled charge close. Okay, so the only two buttons we're going to use with this actuator are actually charge close and trip. Okay, if it was like a DS breaker, we'd be able to charge it with this, we'd close it with this, and then we'd trip it with this. But this one and something like a K-line, it's just push the button once and it goes into motion, and it's going to come back down now, and the breaker's now closed. Now we want to trip it, we'll just push the button once, and now the breaker's tripped. Okay, so that's the ease of operation of this system. Now, you know, if you've got different versions of AAK breakers and other things, don't be afraid to send us your pictures. You can email us at info@cbsarcsafe.com or call us at 1-877-472-3389 and talk to either Lauren, Travis, or Chrissy in the office to get assistance. That's 1-877-472-3389 or info@cbsarcsafe.com. The last breaker we're going to deal with today is the Westinghouse / Eaton Cutler Hammer / Eaton VCPW. The Westinghouse was the original manufacturer of the VCPW, and if you were to actually look at the big blue label on the face inside of this cubicle, you'd see the big W for Westinghouse on there, and it says Westinghouse below it. And so this breaker was made in 1991. It was a couple of years after that that Eaton bought up Westinghouse, and then it became the Cutler Hammer or Eaton Cutler Hammer VCPW. Now, the basic racking mechanism of the VCPW hasn't changed in 33 years. Okay, so I'm going to sit down here. Brian's going to cut to a different camera right now so you can see what I'm doing. But this is the lockout tagout interlock defeat right here. If I was trying to do this with an RS1, I have a problem because I'm trying to constantly push on this thing and go like this, and I'm trying to get the tool on at the same time. But if I take this, whether I'm using the RS3 or the RS1, I push this in and I move the lockout tagout interlock into place, it easily exposes the racking mechanism, defeats the spring, and now I have a much easier time, whether I'm dealing with a RS1 or an RS3 system, putting this on the breaker. Okay, now this basic part of the racking mechanism is used on 5 kV, 15 kV, and 38 kV breakers. It'll look different around the frame and everything based on the size of the breaker, but this general area right here remains the same. So let me get our racking tool over here, and I'll work to get it installed. And you can see right here on the end, we've got the tool. This is the latch that latches it into place. These two go right over these two bolts right here, so that they're not going to interfere. And our camera right here is going to help us be able to monitor stuff as we do this. So we're going to work to put this on. You got to push it just a little bit, and then you're going to lock it into place right there. All right, now we'll work to turn our power on. So I'm going to take and bring this over so you can look and see in the display as we do things. Can you see that on the display, Brian? Okay. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'm going to do enable, and we've got the breaker installed, so we're going to work to do enable and remove. One of the things to understand is this thing isn't made to go fast, okay? And that's the basic design of the switchgear itself. It's made to be racked at the rate that a man racks the breaker. If you try and go faster than this with things, you can destroy switchgear. Okay? So that's one of the things to understand is we design things to operate at the rate a man does things, just so we keep things safe and also preserve the equipment. Say again? The torque, there's an indicator on the right side, or correction, left side of the display, displaying the torque as the breaker moves right now. One of the things to note is, up until the time that the breaker contacts the bus, we really shouldn't be seeing over like 5 to 10 foot-pounds of force as it moves. Okay? So this is going to bring it all the way out. When it gets to the end, it will relieve the stress in the mechanism here in just a second after it stops. So I'm just going to keep holding it. And you'll see it stop and then reverse about half a turn. Okay? So that's how we stop and reverse the torque right there. Now, one of the things to note here, as I work to set this back up for the next part, is we're going to go rack it back in now. And I'm going to hold this over here so hopefully we can see this happen a little bit better.
Great.
Yep.
Don't rack it back.
Don't? We're good? Okay. So one of the things to note is the indicator does show you down here where the flag is. And there's a little red flag that displays actually when the breaker gets fully back into the operational position. So that's one of the advantages. It actually does watch to see that that flag comes into display. Okay? Now, every once in a while, you'll find a breaker or a cubicle, whether it's in a VCPW or in a power vac, that things aren't right. Okay, just to talk about the condition of the switchgear. Remote racking doesn't repair the damage or manufacturing defects in switchgear. Okay, and the reason I say that is this: most of your VCPW breakers, from 1200 to 2000 to 3000 amp breakers, are going to rack with under about 15 to 17 foot-pounds. The 1200 and the 2000 amp are usually going to rack with under about 13 foot-pounds of force. I have seen a substation where it was 27 foot-pounds going in and out on every single 3000 amp breaker in this substation, and kick out at the top and then reverse that angle as it came back out. Okay? The people who made this said it was made within specs according to Eaton's design specifications, even though the breakers did this. And inside of the power plant where this stuff was, they had the same style breakers, and they only took like 14 foot-pounds to go in and go out on an RS1, but they said, is this normal? And I said, no, not really. And I've seen this also in a refinery, but the number of times you run into this stuff, it's like less than 1% of the time. Okay, just understand, if you have something like this, you have a maintenance issue in the cubicle, and while the remote racking operation may be successful and everything else, you still have to address your maintenance issues. Okay, so again, if you got questions, please start forwarding those to Ben right now, and the number is 1-877-472-3389, or you can email us at info@cbsarcsafe.com. And I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today to the presentation. Okay, one more time, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today. The number is 1-877-472-3389 or info@cbsarcsafe.com for more information. Thank you and have a great weekend.